everyone. Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, Jody Samuels, my husband Gavin. This is our house, and it's been a little pandemonium arriving today. We just arrived back at the house 5 to 7. That's like as in an hour and 20 minutes ago from a 3.5-week being away for Pesach and delayed flights and everything. But thanks to amazing volunteers who helped fought and set up everything. So to Grant and Jordana and Esther and Rabbi who's downstairs, and the people who always hold JIC together. I couldn't do it without my amazing volunteers. And I call Esther my Queen Esther because she's always coming to my rescue on more than one occasion. So this event, usually we have like so many more people. And this year, I just decided for security reasons to limit the numbers, because I wanted to make sure people who came in the door submitted social media profiles or we knew them. I just didn't want, like sometimes we have over 100 people and, you know, sirens and God forbid and too many issues. I was like, I just decided this year. So the reality of the times we live in are like affecting us over and over again, but that's why people are so official this year with the band and everything. But I think that, you know, there's just a certain reality, and it reminds us like why we need Israel and why we need our IDF, because we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. And if we actually have to take these precautions in Israel, you know, it's very real out there what's going on. I also want to thank, we have some donors here, some board members, people who give this hosts to open their home and run events in their homes for us. We're a small organization, and a lot of what we do is because people open their homes and give us like warm, homely environment. And we say Jewish International Connection is your Jewish home away from home. We started the Jewish International Connection in 2000 when we moved to New York, when we were new to a city and we were felt lost, and we knew that people needed this Jewish home, a home away from home. And now we moved to Israel 9 years ago, and now we have events in New York, Miami, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv. We reach thousands of people. And just like a taste of upcoming events this week, Shabbat, there's a big Unity Shabbat in Tel Aviv with 1,000 people at a hangar in Tel Aviv. JIC is one of the co-sponsoring organizations. Saturday, we have a big program, a third meal program on Saturday afternoon. We have coming up for Yom Yerushalayim in Jerusalem, the Shabbat before Yom Yerushalayim. We have a young professionals dinner on the roof in the old city in this gorgeous venue. We also have Kabbalat Shabbat. And then Saturday, we're going to have a speaker at the Shul, Sheikh Hadash and Emek, and 45 Emek. We have a third meal program. So now that you guys, if you weren't on the list before, you'll be on the list. And part of the reason we ask for age is because some programs are for young professionals and some programs are community programs. I want to say, you know, and we also just we have some of the most amazing trips where we take people on these adventure tourism, spirituality trips. We recently were in South Africa, we've done India, Thailand, and the trip coming up in the summer is to Peru. We go and it's like a social justice mission. We have rabbis who come with, it's kosher, Shomer Shabbat. So, you know, check out our program. We just went to Shabbat in Dubai, and we were speaking with them about running programs there. One of the places, believe it or not, that you can walk around with a kippah and protests aren't allowed, and you know, flags and genocidal comments are actually forbidden. Who would believe that it would be in an Arab country? So we'll be looking at running some of these. I want to say thank you to Zikaron Basalan for making this happen every year, for bringing speakers, and it's getting harder and harder to find speakers who are willing, able to speak. And of course, there's not so many speakers who speak English. So thank you to Mrs. Wise for agreeing to come speak. And with that, I'm going to have Rabbi Rubenstein come and give a little introduction. Rabbi Rubenstein,
2 hours.
A little introduction. And Rabbi Rubenstein is like an unbelievable educator and a Holocaust historian. He has led 2 of my programs that we've taken to Poland. And we're actually talking about possibly running a third with maybe Poland and Lithuania. So stay tuned for details of that. But if you haven't been to Poland, the difference between reading or seeing a movie and actually visiting is really very different. And everybody should go to Poland in their life. So stay tuned for those details. Rabbi Rubenstein actually knew my husband and I, him and his wife, Tova, were at our wedding. And they knew us when we were young and wrinkle-free, long, long ago. So we've known them for many, many years. And with that, I'm going to let Rabbi Rubenstein make an introduction, and then we'll have our speaker. Thank you. It was me.
Have to stand here. Okay. This is firstly, Erev Tov, good evening. This is not an evening, I think, of applause and of small chat, but I must, as they say, open before Daksania to say something about the amazing work that Jody and Gavin do. When we first met them, they were very shy, very introverted counselors. This is the gospel. Amen. They were very shy, introverted counselors at our informal Jewish education activities at King David School in Johannesburg. I remember the first thing, where's Gavin? The first thing that Gavin did was he was not happy with the way that we were treating people who had aches and pains, Jewish kids. So he compiled a manual for your average madrich. If the kid complains about X, you do Y and Z and P. I'm sure that should have been published at a certain stage, but from the beginning, they decided that things needed to be more organized. And when we come to events here, and this is the third year, Baruch Hashem, that they've asked me to speak, maybe the last. But when we come to, because I haven't said what I want to say yet, but when we come to events here, it's not only honor and an honor to talk to you people and an honor to be here, but it also gives a great deal of nachat ruach to see how things have developed and how things have grown and the tremendous things that they do. I'm going to start off with a story. I'm a collector of stories. There is a 63-year-old man who manages to get a whole bunch of people, including him, there were 8 people, to hide from the oppressors. He manages to pull them in a room. He manages with unbelievable thinking to realize that the door of the room can easily be opened from the outside. So he finds a bicycle in the room and puts the bicycle under the handle of the door, and with all his 63-year-old strength, he holds that bicycle in place so that the door cannot be opened by the oppressors. And he tells the people in the room one thing: just be quiet. And a year ago, if I told the story, you would say to yourself that this happened in Poland, in Ukraine, in France, in Italy, in Romania and Hungary. But the story happened in a suburb called Mishor HaGefen in Ofakim. And after the 7th of October, many people began to think, it's happening again. And there was an initial temptation to conflate what's happening here in this country and what happened on the 7th of October. You don't know what the word conflate means. It means erroneously confuse and make one, okay, with the Holocaust. And I want to suggest very briefly, because I've only got an hour in reality, I want to suggest that it's true, it's not true to conflate the two together. These are two completely separate realities for a number of reasons. And yet it is true. Probably for the most important reason. And we'll get to that earlier. It's not true, Chaverim, friends. It's not true to conflate it. What happened on the 7th of October was the worst pogrom since the Holocaust. I must be quite candid with you. that it's now 7 months later. What's the date today? Yeah, it's about 7 months later. And I haven't yet allowed myself, me who's been to Poland about almost 100 times and has been studying the Holocaust since I was yo-ha, and know things that I would never share with anybody, okay? I have not allowed myself yet to expose my neshama to exactly what happened on that day, because I don't think I could take it in this reality. It was horrendous, but it wasn't a Holocaust. Number one, the Israeli army was a little bit asleep. I burst out crying when we were in Ofakim last week, and Shuki told us the story of desperately trying to save the people in the mamad in his house by holding that door closed with the bicycle. He's since built a piece of wood with niches in it, so if this, God forbid, happens again, he'll be better prepared. It was probably the only time that day that I really sobbed. And what made me sob was 53 people were killed in that neighborhood, and they had to save themselves. They had to protect themselves because the official bodies of this country were not there. You know, the Nova event that we've all heard of, where 360 young people were killed, beautiful young people. They got permission. When we went there on Tuesday, my grandson, who maybe shouldn't have been there, my youngest grandson who's 7, I had to take him to the car because we were hearing these booms and booms and booms from what the Israeli army was doing in Gaza. It's right on the border. And they had official permission to run an event like that, of that magnitude, right near the border. But they forgot to tell the army in the area that there were these thousands of kids there. So they knew they had to defend Be'eri and Kfar Aza and Nir or whatever, and so on and so forth. But they didn't know that there were all these thousands of people here. Sitting ducks, they just didn't know they were there. So something went wrong. But nevertheless, within a day, we pulled ourselves together and we were reacting in a way that we couldn't react during the Shoah. Make no mistake, there's nothing that makes me more irritated and angry and frustrated than when people say that Jews in the Shoah went like lambs to the slaughter. We did not. Jews in the Shoah fought back. Jews in the Shoah resisted. And resisting isn't only fighting back physically. Resisting is just keeping alive. Just keeping a family together is a form of resistance. We fought back in so many ways, but we didn't have an army that may have been a bit asleep and woke up. Yesterday, on Friday, we heard the terrible news that this young boy who was at the Nova was declared dead. What happened was that the Tzachi people, the Zaka people, seemed to have remembered finding something that was equivalent to his DNA, but they couldn't find it anywhere. And then they figured he'd been buried in a grave together with somebody else. They exhumed a whole bunch of people until they found his remains buried with somebody else in the grave. And we don't want to dwell too much on what remains means in this circumstance. And he was brought to Kever Yisrael. He was buried with Kedusha. He was buried with holiness and sanctity and dignity in a way that people in the Holocaust weren't buried. You go to Chełmno in northwestern Poland, and you still see bone fragments laying there on the ground of Jews who were killed, burnt, and their bones were crushed, and were never brought to any type of burial. So you can't compare it. There was this power that responded. There's the Kavod Hamet. Those who didn't survive were treated in a different way. But there's even a greater reason why you can't compare the two events. We are not the same Jews. We are just poshet, simply not the same Jews. And again, chas v'chalila, I'm not being in any way critical or saying anything negative of the Jews of the Holocaust. It's my grandfather, my grandmother, and my uncles and aunts and my family. Well, who are we to say anything? There's no judgment here. We're different. When I take young people to Poland, hey, pashut lo musugalim lahavin. They don't understand. Why didn't Jews fight back more? You have 200 SS guards and 5,000 Jews. Let them rush them. Maybe even 1,000 Jews will be killed. that 4,000 Jews will be able to run away, but it wasn't in the Jewish mentality to do things like that. You didn't do that in those days. You know, if a Jew had a problem, you know what to do? You did something called stadlonis. What's stadlonis? Yankel knows Chaim, who knows Punky, who's in the business with Dunky, and he goes to speak to him because Dunky knows the local governor, and money exchanges hands, and the problem goes away. Protexia. Vitamin P wasn't invented in Israel. That's the way things were done there. Jews didn't take action. They started to change in the Warsaw Ghetto, and the Bialystok Ghetto, and the Benzene Ghetto, and the Auschwitz uprising, and the Sobibor uprising, and the Treblinka uprising. And I'm purposefully giving a whole bunch of examples because it wasn't an isolated incident. It began to change there. But until then, Jews didn't fight back. They were the Jews of the end of the Galus, of the end of the diaspora. We are the Jews of the beginning of the Geula. We are the Jews at the beginning of the Renaissance of the Jewish people. We don't take it anymore. And because there's polite company here, I won't say exactly what we don't take, but you understand the word that I'm not using because it's not rabbinic. Jewish blood is no longer cheap. If Jews are attacked, somebody has their back. And the world knows this. And that's the major change that has taken place. So there may be some superficial similarities in what happened in Israel on the 7th of October and thereafter. But fundamentally, it's not the same because we are different. And when we start thinking about the 7th of October in terms of a Holocaust and start talking in terms of what the psychologists call learned helplessness, where we feel helpless because of it, we're not helpless. Maybe some people around this country are a bit hopeless, but we're not helpless. That's my only political comment. We're not helpless. There are people with strength and people with power who know what to do. It's a different reality, and yet it's the same reality. Because at the time of the Holocaust and today, we realize just how much we are loathed, just how much we are hated. You know, I grew up in South Africa, and apartheid South Africa was always liberal because it was right to be liberal in South Africa, you know, human rights and there's a legend in my family that a nephew of mine once told a racist joke at the Shabbos table, and I leant over the Shabbos table and slapped his face and told him, at my Shabbos table, you don't speak like that. It was quite a funny joke, but it just wasn't appropriate. But the world has gone crazy. The world has really gone crazy. When people used to say, Halacha b'yadua she'esav soneh Yaakov, it's an established fact that the non-Jews hate the Jews. Always, no, that's not my Torah. My Torah is that human beings talk to each other, we recognize each other, we respect each other, and we find some type of modus vivendi. And I still don't believe it. But if you look around during the times of the Holocaust, they hated us. You know, it occurred to me many years ago that the Germans didn't hate us because we were richer or poorer, or because we were less or more powerful, or because we were believed to have vermin or not vermin. The Germans hated us because of what we stood for. Because Hitler taught his followers that the Germans are Übermenschen. The Germans are superior beings. On the one hand, that means we're better than the British and the French and the Dutch and the Scandinavians and the Greeks. But on a deeper sense, what he was teaching his people was, we are above it all. We are above morality. We are above any type of God-given morality. We're above it all. We can do what the hell we want. He said once to the Swedish ambassador, they say my followers are barbarians. I want my followers to be barbarians. I want them to do whatever they can do in this world, just to further our aims. Who stands for exactly the opposite of this? The Jewish people. We gave the world the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments morphed itself into Judaism and morphed itself into Christianity, and in a more interesting way morphed itself into Islam. And the vast majority of the world today, in one way or another, I'm not talking about the extremists, but the vast majority of the world today, in one way or another, seems to have some type of sense that there is a God or some type of divine authority that expects humans to behave according to certain fundamental principles of behavior, and that's us. So the Nazis had to destroy us. They weren't only destroying Jews, they were destroying Judaism. Because they couldn't survive with us in the world. If you look today, the same thing is happening. Because we have in this world, I don't know whether it's modern or postmodern, I don't like these terms too much, but we have in this world this culture that has developed, both on the right and on the left, whether you're in the States or you're in Europe and whatever, this culture that anything goes. This culture that you can't ever take a stand against anything, because if you take a stand against anything, you're not being politically correct about something, from one person or the other, and then you cancel. You know, cancel culture. This culture that rejects any type of limitations as to what the human being wants to do. It's on university campuses, it's in the academia, it's in the streets, it's all over the world. And we see once again, we've done it. Never, we've upset them. We've upset them. Because this huge pogrom took place, and instead of lying over and falling dead, or falling over and lying dead, whichever the phrasing is, you put it together for me, we got up, we shook ourselves off, and the entire Jewish world was galvanized. And we upset them. We don't want, this is not really this nationalism, this power, this belief in some type of ordained morality, in some type of challenge for human beings to be better. This belief, it's pasnished, it's passé, it's not there. And we have this explosion that we've never seen before, this ridiculous explosion of young people on campuses throughout the world who haven't got the foggiest idea what they're actually fighting about. They just know what they're fighting about. They're fighting against us. They're not fighting, what did I do here? They're not fighting, we're moving into all the darkness. They're not fighting against for the Palestinians, they're fighting against us, and we understand why they're doing it. Last line. I was always taught that Jews are supposed to be an Or Lagoim. You're supposed to be a light unto the nations. It occurred to me recently, I told my daughter this today because I thought it was such a new idea that I thought of during my meditative moments of Tefillah this morning. And then she told me, you told it to me about 2 months ago when Emma was away. So obviously I thought of it then as well. When we say that Jews are supposed to be Or Lagoim, it's not a light. It's a mirror. You know, there are many people here who've taught or been in a teaching position from time to time, and you get the student who's not really achieving his potential. And you have two choices. You can either go to that student and lambaste him and tell him how terrible he is, and he'll never amount to anything. Or you can hold a mirror up to that student and say, look, this is who you can be. This is what you can achieve if you just pull yourself together a little bit. You don't even have to say that. And the ironic truth is that when you show them what they could be if they pull themselves together, they don't necessarily love you. They don't love you for it. Sometimes people are content just to be where they are. Our job as Jews is to show the world that mirror and to say, you can be better. You can be better. Hamas, you can be better as human beings. This mass murder and bestiality and rape and pillage, you can be better. University campuses, people for the world, you can be better. And the world hates us for it. But that doesn't mean that we have to stop for 1 minute, because that's our job in the world, not just to survive, but to be a light unto the nations, showing them this mirror. You can all be better. You can be better. Every year here, we have the unbelievable privilege to hear from a survivor. Miryam, I'll give you your Hebrew name that you got back after. But Miryam will say, no big honor to me being a survivor because it was my parents. But even though Miryam's parents survived, she was young, she had to have, after having lost family, after being through such a trauma, she had to have that strength and that drive that I had no understanding of despite it all, to build, and to build family, and to build new roots, and to build a future. And we salute her for that. And we need to know that Miryam didn't only build a Jewish future so that we can say, yeah, Jews in the world. Miryam built a Jewish future so that each one of us in our own way, and this has nothing to do with religion, but each one of us in our own way can say, we will do something more to hold that mirror up to the world and to fulfill our responsibility to make this world a better place, despite it all and because of it all. Makasha. Let's go.
Okay. I'm sorry, everybody. The worst thing that can happen to me is lose my voice because of it. Thank you for your kind words in the drasha. I was born called Miryam Goldman, in Italy in 1937, to Lola and Chaim Goldman. Both my parents had been born in Poland. My father in 1910 in Rasha, which was in Galicia, to a very Orthodox family, one of 10 children. My mother was the only child of Butcher and Joseph Pshenica from Warsaw. And very recently, I found out that my family in Warsaw we have records of 7 generations of business dealings in Warsaw. So it's long-standing, long-time family. I don't know, I mean, it's amazing to me. But to move on, how come I was born in Italy? My mother's parents left Poland after the First World War. Well, first, my grandfather hadn't been well, so he went for medical treatment. He was able to go to Switzerland. Then they settled in Strasbourg, France. Do anybody know Alsace-Lorraine, Strasbourg? That's where my mother is. At 1920, they settled there. And there were family members that came from Poland and settled there afterwards, and thereby saved their lives. But this has only been talked about recently. I never really thought about it, really. But she grew up in Strasbourg, went to school and was very involved with Jewish movements. She was Zionistic. And my father in Poland left Poland in 1930. His mother had been widowed, left with a few younger children. So together with a slightly older brother and his brother's wife, they went to Germany, worked for several years, and it was the rise of Hitler in 1930. I never discussed this with my father, unfortunately. Sorry, I shouldn't. And we really didn't talk about the war very much, or his family. I think we did one course pay, and I'll get to all that. But my father left Germany and went through Strasbourg on his way to Italy, where he and his brother planned to go to Palestine. This was 1936. He remained in France, in Strasbourg, for a number of months and met my mother, and then was forced to leave with his brother. They went to Milan, Italy, and there they sojourned. We just had Pesach, so they sojourned there because they loved Italy and the Italians and remained there. And then my father got busy and started writing my mother letters and cards, wooing her from a distance and persuading her to come and marry him, which she eventually did. And I'm the result. Fast forward to September 1938, when Chamberlain, my mother always, when she told the story, always talked about Chamberlain in his paper for a piece in our time. She returned to Strasbourg with me in her arms. I was 9 months old. And she joined her parents because she was an only child and there was talk of war. And France and Germany loathed each other, and that part of France, Alsace-Lorraine, had always been contested by the French and the Germans. In fact, before the First World War, it had been German territory. If you know your history, I'm going to give you a quick history lesson. And the First World War, as the Germans lost the war, France regained the territory. And the people were very Germanic, by the way. I don't remember any of this. I was 9 months old. My mother returned and found she was pregnant. And by March 1939, I had little brother Sammy, was born. But 2 weeks before his birth, approximately, my father was able to join his wife, and then she gave birth. It was a big celebration because it was Purim, and so on. We remained in Strasbourg until end of August 1939. The population of the region was told, Jewish and not Jewish, any families with young children and old people should leave the area. We qualified. My grandparents were in their 50s, and my grandfather, I think, was in his 60s. I'm a bit, my maths isn't so good. But and Sammy and I was 20 months old, and my brother Sammy was 5 months old. So we left the region, and it took several days. We were very lucky. We ended up in a part of France. We were allocated a particular city to go to, Périgueux. If any one of you has ever been Périgord area, it's very beautiful now, I believe. I've been, but you know. And my dad had a car, so we took several days to get there. A lot of refugees on the road. We settled there because all our dossiers, our papers were sent there together with my grandparents. They found rooms. And by the way, my mother spoke a perfect German and French, and my father spoke every other language except English and French. But they settled there, and immediately community, my father having been brought up in the Orthodox, as an Orthodox Jew, he was, you might have known, as we have a rabbi here, the Blujeveruf. My father studied with him for 20 years in the yeshiva and was very involved. On the other side of my family, my mother was the other way. But so both sides fighting still to this day. But we remained in Périgueux, and I remember going to school there. And in fact, I remember Maréchal Pétain coming, who was the leader, the president of Free France. My father, when we arrived, applied to join the army. So he was in training in the Légion étrangère, not the Foreign Legion, but it was foreigners, a lot of Polish young men who volunteered for the army, and my father was one of them. My mother was left with 2 young babies and her parents. My grandfather was an invalid. He had through illness after the First World War, and that's why he was in Switzerland. He had his leg amputated, so it was a bit of a burden. Sammy and I went to school, and life was pretty, I suppose, for my parents, worrying because they didn't know what was going on, but they did try and earn a living. I'm going to tell you why we left the region. My parents were able to continue in business, my grandfather, and they were commerçants. You know, they had a shop before in Strasbourg, and they were able to get stock. How do you live? You have to earn a living. They got stock from Paris, and my grandmother had a very good name in business. And my grandfather was accused of black marketeering, and my father took the rap, so he ended up in jail. And my mother visited him, and I don't know how long this went on for, but apparently before he was due to be released, the policeman who was in charge of my father said to my mother, "You have to come and pick him up very early because he's going to be picked up and taken away." He was a foreign Jew. He was not a French Jew. We were never French. I was always called Frenchy, but I was never French. My mother picked my father up, and they told her, "Leave immediately. You have to leave as quickly as possible." So the entire family relocated to a small place called Evolivin, which was a spa town. My father taught swimming. I find it amazing that a yeshiva bocher can teach swimming. But his mother must have been a very enlightened woman, and she taught her children. She threw them in the lake, and they had to learn to swim. So they all could swim. And he earned a living that way. And we lived in that, and I remember that small, it's probably quite a big town, spa town. And I went to school, and I remember I was terrified of the gypsies because I was down the road. And rumors started circulating at that point that young men were being picked up off the streets in France, and not just at random. But my mother was concerned about her husband, who was a young man. By that time, we're talking 1941. He was 31 years old. And she was concerned, and she needed him. 2 babies, 2 little children, and her parents. And so she would go and hide. They had access to a garden shed, and they slept there the night. And one day, they came out one morning and left my brother and I together with my grandparents. I don't remember any of this, although I remember landmarks and things. These are flashes of memory, but otherwise, it's things that I've heard, snippets of what I've heard. My parents had made friends with a German couple who had escaped Germany and come to central France somehow or other, found their way. They were in their 60s, and they were very friendly with my grandparents. And when they came out of hiding one morning, they found that these people had disappeared. They're old. And the reason was, why were people being picked up? They're going to work in the East or something. No, it was, it was such a lie to keep the population quiet and feel secure, especially the Jewish population. They were picked up and never heard of again, as far as I know. I don't know. It was never shared with me. We moved from that town. As a matter of fact, Leon Blum, who had been the president of France until France capitulated, France fell in May 1940. The German armies marched in. I should have mentioned this earlier. The German armies marched into France in May 1940, and France capitulated. They gave up. They put their hands up and they ran, a bit like the Italians. And France was divided into 2. There was the occupied zone from imaginary lines south of Paris. I look at France like an apple, divided into half or a bit more than half, and you've got the occupied north to the German border and Belgium and Luxembourg, and then south, which was the unoccupied zone. We were in the unoccupied zone. As Jews in the unoccupied zone, we did not have to wear the yellow star. Children over 6 had to wear the yellow star, as would my parents have had to, but they didn't. We were in the unoccupied zone, and there we were, and I don't know how much my parents knew. I was too young, and I wouldn't have been interested anyway, really, So, so the Jews, I think, I don't know what they felt or what they thought, really. It was never shared with me. But we left Évaux-les-Bains after about, 7 months, 6 months, because I did go to school. And I was not aware of anti-Semitism. We went to a smaller town then called, and it wasn't a great distance. I always thought we traveled hundreds of kilometers. We never did. It was about 15 kilometers semicircle. So we ended up in a place called Pegda, and where my parents, we had our identity papers, Golden and Pshenica, Lola and Henri, Chaim, as they called him, and Sammy, Miryam and Sam, Solomon Goldman. I was always called Mimi. And my brother, instead of Solomon, was always Sammy. That was very convenient, actually. And we came to this Pelletin, and there my parents presented their papers and were allowed to live in the community. And I remember starting going to school there. And my parents made it their business. We had our identity papers, which allowed us to have food, like flour and oil, the necessities of life. But when you needed extra, and we had 4 adults and 2 children, and it was important to feed the children. Jewish parents always feed their children. And it's country town, so my parents used to go to various farms in the area to pick up extra eggs and things like that, and became friendly with the residents. And in particular with the policeman. I call him the chief of police. He was probably the only policeman in town. I don't know. But he said to him, my father one day said to him, if anything ever happens in this town that's important to us, would you let me know? And I think it was, I don't know what he knew, but he was political, so he understood anything you should know. So we were on the 4th of November 1943. The policeman had two men come to his office, and his residence was at the back of the office. They had a sheet of paper, and 13 family names was on that sheet of paper. And he realized that all those 13 names were the Jewish families that had come to find sanctuary in Velta, in his town. And he apparently excused himself, and he went to his wife and daughter and said, warn the Jews, they're in danger, they've got to leave immediately. It was a Thursday. In France, kids in those days, didn't go to school on a Thursday. So they came about 11, 12 o'clock. When the families are sitting around the meal in Europe, you have family meals. You sit down, especially in the country, you sit around the table, and they would come to you. Someone, if they wanted to come and get an entire family, very easy. They don't have to go to the school. My father wasn't working in those small towns and farms. I don't know what they were doing. They weren't university lecturers or accountants. You know, they were just easy to pick up. We were warned. I remember my mother taking me and my father taking my brother, each going into a different direction to warn a Jewish family. And my father picked up my grandparents because they lived elsewhere, not far, but elsewhere from us. And we walked in France, there are forests. We walked into a forest. And they knew in that forest that there was a farmhouse because they'd had dealings with the farmer. And they approached him and they said, I don't know what they said. They must have explained to him that they were in danger. And the farmer said we could use his barn for his one night. We ended up staying there 3 nights. Not just our 2 families, but 10 other families joined us. And the farmer looked after us for 3 nights. We had nothing. We were just in the clothes that we wore. It was a sunny day. It was in November. I remember it was a sunny day walking down the dirt road into the forest. And my parents always kept us normality, quiet. You know, they didn't want us to be trouble. So there was always a pattern. You went to school, wherever you changed schools, a number of times each time. And life was quite. And now this was a very different situation. One family didn't come, and I'm going to stop here to tell you about this family because it's always affected me very much. A family called, they weren't warned, and I think that they lived a little way from the rest of the Jews. They were living more where a few non-Jewish families they had befriended. And I think that the adults who were in the group didn't realize what had happened. What had happened was they weren't warned. And it was a husband called Deutsch and his wife who was heavily pregnant, and they already had 3 children, together with her father-in-law and mother-in-law. When she saw the policeman coming with 2 strangers, she was afraid that her husband was going to be taken away. He was about 36, 37. Why do I know all this? I only know all this through Google. Someone suggested here in Jerusalem a few years ago, actually 6 years ago, exactly on my 80th birthday. Now you know my age. Someone said to my grandson, there must be something. There were so many people that were saved at least 22, 23 souls. Someone must have written, there must be some information. And sure enough, on Google, someone had written a book about his stepfather, who had, on the 4th of November, had lived in Velta, and his family had been taken away and murdered. Now I have a name, and I can tell the story about this family. It's important to me that they're not anonymous. Mrs. Deutsch. The husband escaped because the wife persuaded him to leave unseen. They remained. And the policeman came with the two strangers who insisted on taking her away and the children and her father-in-law, father or father-in-law, I'm not sure, but I'll just say father-in-law. They were taken away, and as they left, the children said to their grandmother, "Au revoir, madame." Goodbye, madam. So that the grandmother wasn't taken. Now, the wife must have been in her 30s. I don't consider that important, but she was very pregnant. There was a boy called Georges, he was 15. There was a girl, Marie, 11. And there was a little boy, Pierre, 8, Dutch. They existed. They were taken to a holding camp in France. And if you don't know your history, in France, there were anti-Semitics and they had camps. They weren't death camps like Auschwitz, but people died there. The Jews were treated abominably. There was disease and there was no food. And those children were there. They were picked up on the 4th of November, 1943. On the 7th of December, together with their mother and grandfather, they were on a list of transports, convoy 67, I think it was, out of France to Auschwitz. They did not survive, not one of them. But we were lucky, we're in the forest, and we didn't know what was happening. My parents returned to Feltin when the farmers came to the group of people who were hiding in the barn and said, "You're putting us in danger. There's rumors going around. You need to leave." And we left. And immediately, my parents got proactive. I had the most amazing parents, young people, determined, and obviously not willing to take anything lying down. A number of months previously, and I do not remember this at all, I should, I was five and a bit, my parents tried to send me to Switzerland, my brother Sammy and I, to Switzerland, to the French border, on a train in the middle of the night in Aubusson. Anybody has heard of Aubusson, where they make those famous carpets? Limoges or Aubusson, that region. We were hidden in that region. So I was put in the middle of the night, Sammy and I were put in the middle, through a window onto a train where there was a young Jewish boy and girl who were going to take us to the border of Switzerland. And if they found someone with 2 children approximately our age. I had an aunt, a maternal aunt, who was going to take us, look after us, but didn't work. And for 2 days, my parents didn't know what had happened to us. And the parcels, they got a telegram eventually came, the parcels are being returned. 2 parcels returned, and then my parents had to do something. This was very serious. First, my parents went to see the local priest, and I remember going there. I thought it was a monastery. I had this enormous building, but it turned out it was a church, and my father talked to the priest. They presented themselves, and the priest really wanted to help the family, but he was talking to Chaim Goldman, who was my father was I thought he was a scholar. I still think he was a scholar. He knew a lot. He'd been for many years in Shiva, and his greatest pleasure was to study. So he was this country priest talking to someone who knew the Old Testament. Wow, he wanted to keep him with him. And with that, he would help the family. But the price was too high for my father. The children would have to go to church every day and convert to Judaism, to Christianity. And my father said, "No, sorry, we'll find another way." Somehow or other, they were able to get fake identity papers, and we became from Goldman. Sammy, my parents became MAI, like in the month of May, and my grandparents became Arnold. And then Sam and I were sent away to strangers, to people we'd never met before. I was just 6 years old, and my brother was not quite 5. And the 2 of us had a new environment. Not too bad for kids, a farm, animals, being looked after. It's a holiday, very temporary, because we didn't see our parents. Although apparently my parents did come by train It wasn't, again, not too far, but they came by train. And on that train, there were German, my mother says officers, there were German soldiers. And at that time, the unoccupied zone was occupied. The German soldiers and officers, and they thought maybe their fake identity papers might not stand up. So they got off at the first station and they walked to the farm. How they knew what, where, I have no idea. It's never been talked about. But they did find us, and I don't remember. I do not remember. But they left, they walked home that night, and what I did forget to tell you, and I often say what I did, but this is very crucial. When we're in the town, in that spa town, my grandmother hadn't been well, so a doctor came to see us, and he sympathized with my parents and grandparents, and he wrote a note, and he gave my grandmother the note, and on outside the note was the name of a man. He said, if you ever need help, maybe this man can help you. So when Sammy and I were sent off safely to the farm in Madartige, my parents made it their business to find this particular man, a Monsieur Belgi. It turns out that they actually found it. I was back there in 1999 with my late husband, and it's really hard to find. It's not too far from Feltham, but it's a difficult area to find. And there's one road that leads to it, a back road. And my parents found Monsieur Belgi. It turns out he was the mayor of the region. He was a very wealthy man. He was a small farmer, peasant farmer, but was actually well educated. He had a huge home, which was a 14th century home, all stone like the homes in here, only much larger, some of your largest. It was like a chateau. And he had a lake on his premises. He had huge wheat holdings, a lot of land. And my parents presented him with the note. He read the note, and my parents said, we're Jews and we need help. And he said, I don't like Jews, je n'aime pas les Juifs, but je déteste les Boches. I hate the Germans. And that was what he said. And my father went to him, and they were together with my grandparents. They got a house, no running water, no electricity, pumps. These are primitive places, and that's how they lived. My father became a peasant farmer. He was a strong young man and very willing to earn his keep, and which he did. And one day, Sammy and I were not aware where they were, and we wouldn't have been. We were too young. How could we? I can't even pretend to say that. I wouldn't lie. But one day, Sammy and I when we were still with these farmers who were looking after us, I was helping on the farm. We were obliged to help them work with like the farm kids. One day I was out on the farm. It's not a big place. And the grandfather was in the house with my brother Sammy, and someone came knocking at the door, and the grandfather got a fright. He took my brother Sam and threw him into the cellar, threw him used to effect. He pushed him into the cellar. My brother Sammy was never a big hero. He is today an amazing man. But in those days, he was a scared, frightened child. If he ran, he sat down in case he would fall down. That was Sammy. But he was alone in his coal cellar where there's awful smells, not just coal. In Europe, in those days, you keep all your vegetables, the pumpkin, the coal, the old furniture, cobwebs, mice, awful, alone. The grandfather, when he's safely tucked away in the cellar, he opens the door and a man comes in, standing there, and he said to the grandfather, apparently, neighboring farmers expected these people of sheltering Jewish children. And in English Australian, you use the term dobbed in. In other words, you tell on the people. I think it's a great expression. I'm sorry you don't understand it, but being dobbed in is not the right thing to do in Australia. You just don't do it. You're considered a traitor. But they were dobbed in, and we were dobbed in, and the grandfather had no power to say to the man, he can't go through the house. He went through the house. If he actually looked in the cellar, I don't know. Sam was so afraid. And but he says he saw boots on the doorstep through a grate. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But it affected him terribly. And my brother today is a highly intelligent man, I think, anyway. I love him, he's wonderful, and my very good friend. And he's never been able to deal with this particular incident. But he wasn't found, and the family decided at dinner that night that we were putting them in grave danger, and we were sent away. Look, had we been found, Sammy and I would have been like the Deutsch children. We would have been put on a train, taken into a camp. If someone would have looked after us, maybe we would have survived. We'd been put on a train, 1,000 at a time was filled up, and sent to Auschwitz. Would we have survived the journey? I don't think so. Would my parents, with all their determination, have found us? I don't think so. But we were lucky, and we weren't found, and we were returned to my parents, and miraculously, they were not in Verdun. They were now in Arboré on this farm, and my dad was working like a peasant, which was okay. And we joined them, and my parents pretended that we were their niece and nephew from Lyon or somewhere, you know, where there's warlike activities. And we remained there among these peasants with my parents and my grandparents for quite a long time, until liberation, actually. There was at one point the village that we lived in, it's a farming community, it wasn't even a village. Sam and I were playing on the roads. My brother, who was always very cluey, said he hears something, and he got agitated. And together with the other two children who played with, we rushed to our home, to where my parents were in the house. And they were outside aware something was going. Our German army trucks started to come through the community on this dirt road, which still is the same as it was then. And my parents had told us to hide behind the bushes, and which we did, and we watched the trucks. You know, I don't know if here in Australia, in Israel, you talk about stranger danger. In Australia, we do. We talk about stranger danger. Young children shouldn't speak to strangers. That was drummed into us. Your name is May, and you don't talk to strangers. And I knew these men with the helmets and in these open trucks, about 12, 14 of them, were the bad men. They were the bad men that I was supposed to be afraid of, and I was terrified. I was not scared of anything much, really, because I'd been always protected and nothing much worried me. But this I was terrified of. They got out of the trucks, a couple of soldiers, and started banging on the nearest door. No one reacted. And what seemed like eternity, certainly to me, I don't know to the others, they left. And Monsieur Belgi was so concerned that together with my grandparents, he said we should stay in his home. And we stayed there for 2 nights. And my parents would sleep in the chicken coop. I've got photographs of all this. So in 1986, my mother finally got up the courage to go, and she was persuaded to go and see it. And we said, why did they do that, Monsieur Belgi? Because if another convoy of German trucks would come through, maybe they would find us. We have 3 Jewish men. My mother was blonde and slim and an attractive lady. My grandmother was more a typically Jewish-looking woman, but we had 3 men among us, all circumcised, with a load of goyim, excuse me, the French, who probably would not have been. We put the entire community in danger. So Monsieur Belgi kept us in hiding for two nights in his home, as I said. And no one returned. And the end of the war, I don't know, bit by bit, we returned back. We returned back to Strasbourg, where this whole sorry saga started. Not before going back to Périgueux, where Rabbi My father made sure that I was starting to have Hebrew lessons. Maybe it was Yiddish, but he really, and we went back to school each step, every time we were going back to school. We went back to school, and it was very important to him. I'm a big disappointment, actually. But anyway, we returned to Strasbourg, and my parents found that everything that they had, the apartment they lived in was reoccupied. They rented it in Europe in those days. You rented everything unless you were really rich. So the apartment, my grandparents' business and everything was ransacked, everything was stolen. The only thing that really remained when my mother went back to the apartment building where she had lived was a pram. Baby carriage. Yes, a carriage, a baby carriage. And it was painted navy blue. And my mother recognized its shape. And she went over and had a look at it. And so, yes, she saw underneath, made in Milano. So she went to the concierge, the landlady, and said to her, who does that beautiful pram belong to? And she said, it was mine. You know, it's mine. And my mother said, oh, I'd like to have a look. And she went over and she scratched the surface and it was cream underneath. And she said, no, it's not yours, it's mine. And she took it back and she took it to the nearest orphanage in Strasbourg. We remained in Strasbourg, and there my father and mother found out the devastation of our family in Poland. My mother's family, the entire family, extended family in Warsaw ended up in Treblinka, and no one survived. Actually, I found out 2 years ago that I did have a cousin, a distant cousin. Her mother had married a non-Jew, and that was the only reason that they survived. But she was a scientist, and she really made no steps other than identify herself. So, and she just died a few months ago. So I never had the opportunity to meet her. On my father's side in Galicia, his 4 sisters together with a brother and a child, all married with children, no one's alive. But my father used to take me, I remember, not used to, did take me once, to the transports that were coming in from the east, from Poland. His family died in Belzec, his mother and sisters, and so we had heavy, like everybody else, we suffered. Our entire family was wiped out that remained in Poland. He had a brother in Italy, my father. He also survived. And he had an identical twin brother in America, who very fortunately, before the Second World War, a young woman came to Galicia, to Russia, and she wanted to meet a nice, well-educated, intelligent yeshiva bocher. And my uncle well, actually, it was supposed to be my father, but my father had been out in Germany, he'd already seen girls. He wasn't interested. So my uncle, in 36, married this young woman and ended up in Bayonne, New Jersey, where he raised a wonderful family with 3 months, still very closely, and they're religious, rabbis among them, and that's something else. But it's really quite wonderful. My family in Strasbourg, my parents were somewhere in a store, a shop. They didn't have big stores. And they said, the Jews are back, they have no been burnt, what a pity. And that was when my parents decided, that's it. We can't live in Europe for our children. And we had to apply to come to Australia. My mother had an uncle, her father's younger brother, and he had left for Australia just prior to the Second World War. And he applied, he guaranteed, he acted as a guarantor. Jews coming to Australia after the war had to be guaranteed that you would not be a burden on the Australian government, that my uncle would look after our every need and pay for everything. That wasn't so for all the Nazis and others that came to Australia afterwards, but for the Jews, we were always different. We're always different. But I must say to you, after a terrible voyage to Australia for the adults, it was horrible. For the children, it was wonderful. And we left Strasbourg, where the rabbi gave me a book, a biblical heroines of the Jewish biblical times, and which I still cherish today. And so we came to Australia with no English, no money, or very little. We actually ended up in Saigon, Vietnam, and Indochine, which was a French colony in those days. I'm talking 1946, 46, 47. We sailed from Marseille through the Suez Canal to Djibouti, which was Ethiopia. I'm going to impress you now, because my dad, being the type of guy he was, we went to a marketplace and the ship moored and docked, and my father disappeared. And when the ship is about, we board the ship, my mother and my brother and I, and my father's nowhere in view. And where's my father? No one knows. And the ship's about to depart, and he comes running down. He's very excited. He's had a fantastic time. He's met Ethiopian Jews. And he's sitting on the floor. I don't know, he must have communicated in Hebrew, because he's, he was, not that he spoke modern Hebrew, he always wanted to, but so this was the type of man my father was. This was the highlight of his trip. And we end up in Singapore. I remember going to Rifles, not very interesting. We go to Indochine, Indochina, and the French are fighting a war there. And the ship that we come in is a cargo boat. We are sleeping in the cargo section of the boat. They built bunks, tiers, 3 tiers, men and women were separated by a curtain. And that's how the Jews and others were transported. It was a French transport, and they had soldiers, I don't remember them, but we had trucks. It was so hot going through the Suez and other parts of towards Singapore, that we took our mattresses and slept either on deck, which was iron, and in trucks. And the showers, they forgot, they didn't have showers, so they built them as we were steaming out of Marseille. I remember they built 2 or 3 showers, saltwater showers for us. And that's how but the worst was for the people who'd come out of concentration camps. We were about 267 people. They offloaded us in Saigon, didn't tell us, give us a word. This is the French authorities, Maritime, Messagerie Maritime, they still owe us money. And they dumped us in, yes, we were supposed to have a first-class passage. Seriously. But we ended up in this compound, the military compound. And it was very... My parents were determined to get out, determined. And we had witnesses to my parents' behavior. A lot of younger people, all busy running around being tourists, even despite the fact that it was a war. But my parents were trying to get out, one way or another. They were running from place to place. And fortunately, they were able to meet the Dutch in the Dutch consulate. They spoke to whoever, I don't know. And the Dutch consulate was able to offer them a plane. If 40 people were able to pay the fare to Australia, there was an American Army transport plane that they had used, and it was available to us. So we were 4 people, 2 adults and 4 children. And there were a few other people. I think people contacted family in Australia and other places to gather the money. And that's how we managed to come to Australia before the ship. We arrived in Australia the 15th of January, 1947. And the ship actually came in February, about February the 19th, 1947. So the others languished in the camp, but we managed to get out. And we were very fortunate. And look, I can tell you, it took about 4 days to reach our destination. And we ended up in what today is the heartland of Islam in Sydney. Mm-hmm. And it was very primitive. And the Australians, my mother wanted to turn around and go back to France. It was really Australians. But I must say to you that we were lucky that we came to Australia. We had the freedom that you know, only Israel can give you, probably as a Jew, in that, except that, you know, we were still Jews, you know. I was Frenchy, I mean, we were French kids. And we had to learn English. Within 2 weeks, I started school because it was school vacation. We have different summers to you. And I went to school and we thrived. My family thrived. My husband, I don't know if you want to hear, I married a Holocaust survivor. I married a young man who came to Australia at the age of 15. He was born in Paris, both his parents were from Poland. And they came to Paris in 1928, I believe. And he had an older sister born in Poland and a brother who was a year older than himself. They were a religious family, Orthodox family, and they were told to leave. The children should be sent out of Paris, Jews and non-Jews alike. And he ended up, apparently his mother went to see Rabbi Zalman Schneerson. He was a rabbi in Paris, in the arrondissement there. And she said to him, I can't send my children. We're Orthodox Jews. I can't send my children to, it's impossible. He said, I'm arranging something, and he did. 120 boys and girls left, were sent. My husband was one of the younger boys, children, and they were sent off, and they were actually saved by those actions. And all 120 managed one way or another to survive under very difficult circumstances. And my husband and his siblings never saw their parents again, which was a great tragedy, something he never. But my sister-in-law, Raymond Feuerwerk, who ended up living in Switzerland and marrying in Switzerland, she was a child, a 15-and-a-half-year-old, chosen to try and cross the German to Switzerland. What had happened was they were being picked up in the children's home where they were taking shelter, and they were given no time to leave. My husband grabbed a pair of tefillin that he saw on the mantelpiece, and they walked out with no clothes, whatever they just walked out, and they managed to get through Passeurs or whatever to the Swiss border. My sister-in-law was one of the older kids who was tasked with looking after a group, and she tried twice to get unsuccessfully to get the children, her brothers and 5 other children across to Switzerland. On the 3rd time, she was able to do it, and she got them across. Nearly all the 120 did get across into Switzerland. After the war, they were kicked out of Switzerland. My sister-in-law had a job, so managed to get a job so she could stay, and she married in Switzerland and in Geneva, and her husband was an Orthodox Jewish boy. And my husband went back to Paris, where he sat at the railway station together with his brother, waiting for his parents to come home. He never believed that they never would, but they didn't. And eventually it was decided that they had to, 2 boys were going to be sent to Canada or somewhere. And they came to Australia. And I was lucky. I got the jackpot. I won the lottery. I married a wonderful man. We had 3 children. One of them is sitting here. And I have 11 grandchildren, 8 grandsons and 3 granddaughters, all adults, with the exception of 2 younger ones. And life's been good. And if it weren't for all the people who really helped us, but I think more than anything, it was my parents. My parents saved people's lives, and I didn't know that till the 1980s when someone came from Paris, and the connection, Jewish geography was made, and the woman said, "You're the woman, very good. You're the man that saved my brother-in-law." So my father and mother were always very active, and I'm doing this because I honor them. I wouldn't be here today. I really wouldn't. I don't usually get like this. But the fact that my father didn't want his children to be converted to something else, I don't know that he understood or not. That's been the driving force of my life. It really has. Thank you. I'm so honored to be here with you, especially on this day. It's been, and at this time, when Israel is going through such difficult times, I want you to know that in Australia, you hear that we all are, the Jews are all my friends who are not particularly, I'm considered the Rebbetzin among the youths, so you can imagine what it's like. They are in a state of total shock. And I'm there trying to say, this is good for our children and grandchildren to understand that anti-Semitism will be, unfortunately, always among us. And we have to be aware that, especially in Hutz Laaretz, we shouldn't take it for granted that we're loved. We'll never be loved. We just need to be respected. We really need to be respected for who and what we are. And especially, and I must say that last time I was in Israel, and I was with a group of young Israelis, and I said to them, just as an offhand remark, but I don't think in this group you need it, you come to Australia or you go overseas as Israelis, you forget that you're Jews. You have to remember that you're Jews. And the hostess afterwards said to me, because I thought I'd overstepped the mark, which I often do. And she said, only you could have said that. So I hope that lesson stuck with them. But it is important. And I'm trying to bring up my children. My daughter certainly leads the way in every way possible. And I'm proud of her. And I'm proud of what my parents achieved in the days prior and in the days after. Thank you very much, all of you.
So thank you so much, Mrs. Weiss. I really,
Mimi. Oh,
okay.
I was told, by the way, before I left Strasbourg, my father said to me, you're going to be called Miryam when we go to this new country. Miryam? Miryam? I never liked the name. I know it was Moses' sister. She loved to dance, and so did I. I used to dance. I loved dancing. But it means better, doesn't it? Or something I was told. Yes, that didn't thrill me at all. It still doesn't.
So I just want to thank you so much, for just sharing your stories. And clearly for all of us, we heard there was miracle after miracle that allowed you to be here to share with us and to have a daughter who's living this Jewish life and keeping the tradition. Yeah. And I think it's truly we see these miracles all the time, and we appreciate that you came to share with us. I want to ask, firstly, I want to say thank you. And I was going to say, I'm giving you a copy of my book. Oh. And the words chutzpah, wisdom, and wine, I think in a way.
Change it to wine.
And I think that exactly your parents showed that kind of tenacity, having this chutzpah and having the wisdom and understanding what was important and balancing it. So please enjoy a copy of the book.
Thank you Thank you.
And I want to ask you something. I think some
Absolutely.
people have some questions if you're okay with it.
And no, look, nothing's off limits. You can ask me the most personal questions. I'm fine with it, okay?
I'll start off with this. There was a quote from Chaim Weizmann, and I'm just curious, as someone who survived and you see what's going on in the world today, Chaim Weizmann was the Israeli president. He addressed the 22nd Zionist Congress. It was the first Congress after the Shoah. And he said, now in light of the past and the present events, the bitter truth must be spoken. We feared too little and we hoped too much. We underestimated the bestiality of the enemy. We overestimated the humanity, the wisdom, and the sense of justice of our friends.
I think he's very, I mean, given the recent event and continuing anti-Semitism, I think he's a prophet.
It's all the world.
Absolutely.
Can you believe you are seeing in today's world what we all thought was something that we'd close the door on?
Well, look, I didn't imagine that Israel would have to ever go through this. I really didn't. I thought in the diaspora we would be. I have no illusions about it. There is anti-Semitism. Even in our wonderful country now, you're seeing all the footage. And we have a prime minister, and I don't know, should I get political? We have yes, we have a prime minister and a foreign minister who are blatantly anti-Semitic. And yeah, absolutely. And why they were voted into even by Jews, I have no idea. I really don't. No. So no, I'm talking not Israel. I'm talking about Australia. No, I'm sorry. You see what goes on. You see what goes on. And I say to my friends, really, it's crazy. They don't like us. They don't love us. What I talk in Australia about Holocaust all the time. So, we're trying to, through the museum and things, we try to show them, that we're not monsters. Hopefully it gets through. I don't know. We try as best we can.
Anybody have a question in the audience that you would like?
I wanted to know what happened to your grandparents.
My grandparents remained in France. Can you imagine their only grandchildren? They remained for another 2 years or 2.5 years. And they joined us in Australia. Didn't speak English. Well, life was very hard. My grandmother didn't live much longer, another 2 years. But my grandmother lived, and no one spoke English. We really had to start from absolutely zero. But for us, it was a country without fault. You couldn't have any Australian people. They didn't like foreigners. And that was a blanket rule for everybody. Everyone was a foreigner. It was that Anglo-Saxon society. But now they were being invaded by very many different groups. Not invaded, it's not right. It's not fair. We have many, very, very successful multicultural society. Only now we're proving that it's not that successful. Yeah.
Sorry, I have a
Rabbi?
question. When Sammy was in the coal basement, where were you?
I was out on the farm helping. We had to always help. We were good French children. We obeyed. We had to, you don't talk to people, we obeyed always. Otherwise, there was a threat of a martinet. You know what a martinet is? A carpet beater.
Ah.
Yeah, it wasn't a policeman, it was a carpet beater.
Carpet beater.
We had an uncle in France, in Périgueux, who was picked up as a hostage in his son, grandson actually lives here in Israel today, and he was so Spanish speaking. But he was picked up as a hostage. 10 Jewish men were picked up and several non-Jews as well. And because a German officer had been killed outside of Périgueux, so they picked up hostages. And the 10 Jews they killed, or 8 Jews, and there's a memorial there. There's memorials all over France. Sarlat, always beautiful part of France, they have memorials to Jews. So who were murdered and taken away.
Did you stay in Sydney, and was there a Jewish community?
Oh yes, we had. We stayed in Sydney. The first thing my father, we lived outside the Jewish community but eventually, again, my parents being my father, we actually moved to he didn't realize where he was moving, or he accepted an apartment. And we lived there, and it happened to be in the midst of the Jewish community, Bellevue Hill, where I still live today now. I've gone back to my roots. And, it's the fact that I was French. I was lucky because I was a French speaker. So all the children wanted to be friends with me. I didn't speak any English, and I resisted it. What kind of a language is that? I mean, listen, you write your B-I-R-D-E-D, bird. It's a bird. And I don't know, for certain type of ship we use yacht, YATCH. That's yatch. I mean, that's not a language. I mean, what is it? So I was very anti. It took me reluctantly nearly a year to learn. But my brother was fluent far more rapidly than I was. But eventually we got in. We went back. We got to Bellevue Hill, and we met Jewish kids, and I went to a school where a lot of Jewish kids. And I went to what we call a public school, which is everybody mixed. But we did mix with the Australian Jewish children. They really didn't want to mix with us. And certainly when we were young girls going out to dances and things in the clubs, which was shul and things, they didn't want to know us. But bit by bit, they can't ignore us for too long. I married a French Jew, so that was special. Yeah.
Okay. Any other?
What was your recollection of the founding of the state in Israel? from the
I was
perspective of
too
being-
young. My parents were thrilled.
Hmm.
I was always, you know, I always feel I always knew about Israel. Always knew about. There's always been this thing in me, and I've been trying to think about it. I'm thinking about it over a number of years. When did I first hear about it? Not just the state, but Israel. Well, probably because of the biblical studies that I reluctantly did with the rabbi in Strasbourg and before. So there was always and then I had afterwards in 1948, I had a young girl come to the school that I was at. She spoke German and Ivrit, but she was Israeli, of German parents, Austrian parents. And I think that made it a stronger impression always. And I've always been aware. My father was a Zionist. He wanted to come to Israel. He really did. And after the war, I think my mother's distaste of us, it was just that she couldn't face it anymore. So we were there, but for the, you know.
Did they ever visit here?
Yes, they did. They did. My father remained always involved in the Jewish community. He was very well known in the Australian Jewish community, both in business world. Not that he was such a big businessman, but in the Jewish world, he was most comfortable among rabbis. He was comfortable with everybody. He was president of Chevra Kadisha, and if anyone is English here, you know that the OBE, Order of the British Empire, my father got that for his work. And he was a man that both my parents, I'm enormously proud of. I can walk around Sydney even today and say I'm Chaim Goldman's daughter. And people say, oh gosh, yes, remember who and what he was. So it's not bad. Not bad.
Where does your brother live now?
My brother lives in Bellevue Hill, and we're very close to each other. And my sister-in-law, and he has 2 children, all adults, coming backwards and forwards here, the grandchildren. So, and he was a dentist. Everyone was a doctor. I worked in a brag trade. I was in the schmutters. That was my claim to fame.
What you?
Did you ever hook up with your uncle
Yeah, in America.
in Australia? You said you had an uncle in
Oh,
Australia.
yes, we did. We went to live with him. We were separated again when we came to Australia. When we arrived, they didn't have, my parents were set up in an apartment of a young couple. And they had a room there. And my brother and I slept at my aunt and uncle's house on the settee. And my aunt, we spoke Yiddish. They didn't speak French particularly well. So I spoke Yiddish because that was really my first language. And my aunt said one day, this is a funny story, if you speak Yiddish. Anyone speak Yiddish? I don't speak it well, but she said to me, gay and them the key from the tea. Go and get the the key from the tier. I'm looking for a cow at the a key in Yiddish is a cow. So I'm looking for a cow at the door. There's no cow. So she she takes me by the hand and she drags me to the door. And she says, "Das ist the key." I said, "That's a Schlüssel."
Okay.
We had moments.
One final question.
Yes.
I found what you said actually very interesting, you know, the Jews at the end of the diaspora and the Jews at the beginning of the movement. I don't know if you can answer it, but I'm just curious, like, do you think that you, like your parents in them knew it was all gonna be okay in the end, or do you think they faked it until they made it?
Well, I think you didn't know who was going to denounce you. I don't know what they knew. They never talked about it. My mother's pain, she was in business with my father. My parents both worked as a team and built everything up together. My father lived to 78. He used to go surfing every day. I mean surfing. He really did every morning before work. I'm sorry. Once you get me going, you can't. As a result, all my children loved water. He lived to 78. He got pancreatic cancer and died. He was going to dance on tables for all his grandchildren's weddings, and he was going to live to 120. He didn't. My mother lived to 96 and a half. We didn't. She was amazing. She always had intermittent issues from emotion and the drama of the Holocaust. And she was in hospital, and we were told she probably wasn't going to live. And we came one morning to see her, and they could give her antibiotics, but we decided she didn't want to live. She told us, "Don't do any interventions." We came one morning, and she was busy making little parcels and trying to save Sammy and Limi all over again. That was uppermost in her mind. She was trying to pack our clothes in preparation for us to leave, because they didn't know what would happen. And that had been, and we told the doctors, calm her down, and she died in her sleep that night. And I'm grateful for that, really I am, because she'd suffered all those years in silence. She never, but it came back at full force. And yeah, I wanted you to know that. It never leaves you. And unfortunately, I mean, here in Israel, you face such traumas, and people have to understand that there's going to be a lot of, if there's ever any healing, you have to do your best. And I feel that here in Israel, and I told my friend, I was speaking to a friend in Sydney today, and I said, Israel's doing well, the people, but the young soldiers, heroic soldiers who are maimed, it's not the ones who are dead, but the ones who are maimed. And I met someone through Ilana in her apartment building, the grandfather of a young man who was so badly maimed. I stood there when I realized who she was talking to, that I didn't know how to react other than cry. So my friends, here in Israel, you're going to need years of help and support for the men and young women who've been so broken, either physically or mentally. It's going to be an ongoing burden for a long time. I know that you're carrying it, but we Jews in the diaspora, if we remain in the diaspora, we need to remember that we are part of this, because if anything happens to Israel, as I said, we're lost. We're lost in the diaspora, and we have to understand that. I understand. That's what I think, and that's what I know. So I think that from my point of view, I'm going to do my best to educate the people around me, that I know that their children, because they're all grandparents, to go on to all the other generations, that they need to understand into the future continuously. You are our future. Israel is our future.
So thank you very much. You guys can speak to, are you able to take the calls, to speak to people now afterwards? If people want to come and talk, some people probably need to go. If anybody I haven't met, I'd love to meet people. There's definitely new faces in the room. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting. It's amazing.